Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Motivate Party podcast. Hope everyone out there is having a fantastic week. So this week, we have got ourselves a bit of a touchy subject. This is off the back of quite a few conversations that we've had of late with our clients, as well as some of the conversations I've had with a lot of people over the years. This conversation is fundamentally about throwing your hands up and giving up. I know for a lot of people, when it comes to investing and all the different things that we talk about on this show, property investment, investing in general, business, growth, mindset, all these different fantastic things. What people sometimes don't really understand is there's a cost to doing this, right? The cost is fundamentally the risks that you're assuming when you invest. Now, here's the thing to consider here, and this is where I'm going to probably start this conversation. See, investing is quite simple. There's obviously a number of different ways to become successful. And when I say successful, this is obviously a property investment show. Obviously, I'm talking about monetarily, right? So, I'm talking about money. Now, for the majority of people listening to this, we would probably consider someone who's successful, someone who's reaching certain targets in terms of career, whether it's financially, we are talking about people who are wealthy. I'm also going to assume that most people listening to this are either trying to become wealthy, they want to become wealthy, or they're on some kind of path in that direction. And I'm going to assume that that's the case for most people listening to this. Now, when we're investing, in fact, when it comes to building wealth and becoming wealthy, there's only a couple of ways of doing that, right? One easy one is winning the lotto. Now, for most people, that's just not an option. For some, it's a case of inheriting some money. And again, unless you've got some very wealthy ancestor who's got your name down in their will, chances are for most people, that's not an option either. There could be some brilliant business idea or some kind of new innovation that you've thought of. Ideas are pretty cheap, but you might have a really good way of implementing that, building something and actually scaling a business that makes you lots and lots of money. But for the most part, most people, the only way to become wealthy is going to be by investing, right? Now, to be clear, having a job, being self-employed, if you're bound by an hourly rate or if you're bound by how many jobs that you can physically do personally, unfortunately, guys, the chances are you're never going to become wealthy doing just that, right? It's going to be a case of having to use some of your money to build an asset base, invest in something, and then the investments is what actually ends up making you wealthy at the end of the day. Now, the thing to consider here, and this is what I'm trying to speak to, when it comes to investing, there is a cost. The cost is you have to risk something. Whether it's a case of you're risking your money in terms of a deposit or the stock or share that you purchase or the bonds that you buy, the point is you're putting money into the market and you're assuming some kind of risk. You could lose your money, right? I mean, a really, really extreme example of this would be you invest in something, you invest in that thing just no longer exists in the future, well, your money's gone, right? So that's one very basic risk. And obviously that's an extreme example, but that's just an example. There's a bunch of other risks, and I'm not going to get stuck into the risks today. What I am going to talk about, though, is the fact that sometimes people don't understand what the risks are or they underestimate what they're actually doing. But when something goes wrong, and this is the most important part, when something goes wrong, they just want to give up. That is what I'm speaking to, right? Now, I want to give you guys some examples of stuff that can go wrong, right? And this is some stuff that we've seen over the years. A lot of this isn't necessarily us and our clients, but this is just some stuff that we have seen where people just think that, oh shit, this has happened, right? So one easy example of this is interest rate increases, right? So obviously off the back of COVID, and I know I've said this over and over again on the show, we have seen the sharpest interest rate rise, increases that we've had on record, off the back of COVID, governments overspending, printing lots of money, and obviously increasing interest rates to slow the market down. Now, the problem that people don't understand is when interest rates increase, the cost of owning a property also increases. Right? Now, the fact of the matter is, in a lot of cases, sometimes the rent doesn't follow. We did see it did follow in Perth. On the East Coast, there are a lot of pockets where it didn't increase, right? Now, the fact of the matter is, if you're making a decision to buy an investment property, and let's just say, for example, you buy the investment property tomorrow and it's costing $100 a week. If the interest rates have just increased and now it costs you $150 to own that property, there have been some people who think, oh, you know what? Bugger this, property investment's not for me. They just pack up and quit and sell it and move on. Bad move. Very, very bad move. Another example could be underestimated costs. So when it comes to working out if a project's feasible or a property's feasible, there are a lot of numbers that I'd be running, right? So I want to know what the deposit is, how much I'm paying in interest on that deposit, what the new mortgage is, what interest I'm paying on that new mortgage, what's the income I'm getting, what are the council rates, water rates, insurance, maintenance, strata, tax, land taxes, and property management fees. So there's a bunch of figures you're going to have to work and figure out. The problem is, though, a lot of it is your best guesswork or best estimations. But the thing to keep in context is those fees and figures also increase over time. I mean, just as an example, when I bought my first investment property over 10 years ago, land tax wasn't a thing. Now, all of a sudden, land tax is a normal bill that I pay every year, and I'm paying thousands and thousands of dollars in land tax every year. So the fact of the matter is, people get their first land tax bill and think, oh, you know what, fuck this, property investment's not for me, and they just want to pack up and go home. Things like, for example, vacancies, right? Having a property vacant for longer than what you want pushes most people away from property investment. In fact, I used to do this is several years ago when I was working with clients, and really what I would ask, what is your biggest concern when it comes to property investment? And the answer I would get wholly and solely from most people is, what if we can't find tenants? What if we buy this house, we take out the mortgage, and this is back in the day when houses were under $400,000. If we go and borrow $400,000 from the bank and we can't find tenants, that's going to completely financially ruin us, right? So that for a lot of people is the biggest concern. But the fact of the matter is, you can't control vacancies. If you have a property that's been vacant for longer than you've planned, I've seen multiple people over the years sell the property and think, nah, property investment doesn't work, it's not for me. Bad tenants, that's a common one, right? I mean, everyone looks fantastic on a rental application until something goes wrong for them, then they stop paying rent. There could be neighborhood disputes. There could be disputes with the property manager or disputes with you. The point is, you can't necessarily control a tenant and all their personality, but that's a risk that you got to assume. Things like downturns. One of the things that we have seen over the last 6 months since Trump's been playing around with the tariffs, but we've seen some real rises and falls in the stock market. We've seen, rises and falls when it comes to sentiment. So I mean, one of the examples of this over the last couple of months, when Trump was really throwing out those tariffs and was being quite aggressive and it was all over the headlines and painting obviously a very grim picture, one of the things that we saw was the stock market tanked for a little bit. Now, when the stock market tanked, one of the ripple effects from that is sentiment also reduced. Sentiment being, how are people feeling? Are they confident? Are they not confident? Now, because we've got a sentiment-based economy, that really means if people are confident and they think that the market's going to move upwards, they put more money into the market, right? If they lose their confidence, they take their money from the market. And that's when the economy, increases or expands or retracts. Because Trump was obviously throwing these tariffs out, we were starting to lose sentiment as a country. And we started to see bank valuations coming quite low all of a sudden. And that's essentially when the bank is going to go and finance a property, whether it's new, established, doesn't matter. They're going to go and do an assessment or what's known as a bank valuation to say, hey, look, this is what we think the value is in today's market. But again, if the bank valuers are losing sentiment, they're going to start lowballing or be more conservative when it comes to the valuations. Now, what that means for you as the buyer is you might need to bring more money to the party because the bank's not going to lend you as much. And this was something that we saw just flipped in the matter of days, purely because of what Trump was doing with tariffs. Now, again, if you're the kind of person who is relying on not having a downturn or relying on not having any kind of market disruption, when it happens, you might have the sense that you just want to quit or want to give up. One common thing that we are seeing across our property management portfolio is people having the incorrect insurances. When they're going to your everyday insurers, those guys that you see on TV ads, most of those insurance premiums are absolute dog shit. They don't cover things like accidental damage. Their excesses are huge. They make any excuse not to pay out, but there's a bunch of problems with them. Whereas there are some insurance providers that we would recommend that are suited mainly for property investment. In fact, they're actually tailored for property investors. Yes, it's more expensive, but they actually cover every time. There's been a number of cases where we've encouraged our landlords to swap providers. They've refused to do so. Something's gone wrong. And guess what? Insurance didn't cover it. I've had conversations with some of those landlords and they wanted to sell their property and quit. This is the same narrative of what I'm trying to speak to today. Sometimes we can have delays. There's been cases where some of our clients who are building properties, there's been delays in titles. There's been cases in the past with clients buying established properties that the finance, that the person who was buying it, their finance was getting delayed and therefore your settlement gets delayed. Things like, for example, government decisions. One of the things that we have seen over the last couple of years is the government has been coming in and making a bit of a mess in terms of the property rules and regulations. Obviously one of the things to keep in context is we are heading towards a future where there are going to be more and more renters. Most of our market are owner-occupiers. However, in the near future, most of the market will be renters, right? So the government will be changing laws to more so favor tenants. We've been seeing this stuff. I mean, one of the things that the Greens wanted to pass last election was rent controls. You as the landlord, they're going to put restrictions on how much you can put the rent up. that would completely wreck the property market in a number of ways. Now, when I say completely, I may be being a little bit overzealous when I say that, but really what I mean is putting rent controls in place is going to force people to adapt and move around that, and it will disrupt the market, right? But again, I've had people say, if they go and do that, I'm just going to go and sell all my properties and I'm going to go and invest in something else, or I'm just going to do nothing, right? Again, bad news. Market's oversaturated. Right? I mean, this is something that we have seen in the Melbourne CBD, where, particularly with apartments. We saw this between 2014 and 2020 in Brisbane with apartments. But you got all these big developers putting all these big high-rise apartments, flooding the market, oversaturating. The property market doesn't perform, for those types of assets. And so the reality is, guys, like I said, without going through the specific risks of property, these are just some examples of things that can go wrong, or things that have gone wrong and has caused people to want to quit investing in property, right? Now, I want to give you guys a couple of anecdotal stories, right? So firstly, the first anecdotal story I'm going to give you is with my parents. Now, my stepdad, call him dad, he bought a house in Kenwick in 1990. He bought that house for $80,000. That house today is worth well over $700,000, right? Now, the point is, he's had multiple rate increases. He's had a bunch of bills that were underestimated that is caused cash flow concerns at some point. He's had a bunch of vacancies. He's had a bunch of bad tenants. In fact, that particular property, I do remember when I was a kid, there was a complaint from the neighbor that, they all basically had a little farm out the back. Lo and behold, we drove past, we saw a horse float, and there's a couple of horses in the backyard. I shit you not. Horses in the backyard. Now, you can imagine my parents' dismay when they saw the horse floats and the fact there was a couple of horses out the backyard. But the reality is the tenants didn't give a shit. And they were kind of like, hey, this is our house and F you. There's been times when insurance hasn't covered it. There's been issues with government decisions, changing rules, and there's been a bunch of issues with the property. But the fact of the matter is, they didn't give up. So buying a house for $80,000, today it's worth around $700,000. Like, they're laughing all the way to the bank because they never gave up. There's another example, but my mum, when we first moved to Australia, bought a house in Maddington. Now, when she bought that house, it was $79,000, and that was in 1999. In 2005, the tenants burnt down the house, right? So apparently, and I'm saying this apparently in quotes because this is sort of the version that I've got, is one of the tenants, I believe it was one of the tenants' sons, was out the back in like the games room, was smoking some weed on the couch, passed out. Whatever he was smoking kind of hit the floor, created like a little fire, and that's kind of how the fire sort of started. Like, the couch he was on just kind of lit up pretty quick. I'm pretty sure I remember that the furniture, because we left some of the furniture there. It was like a pine frame kind of sofa with these there were these big kind of foam cushions. But the point is, that's how the fire started. By the time we got there the following morning, the house was basically burnt to a crisp. Now, again, my mum could have think, you know what, property investment is not for me. The point is she didn't. We got an insurance payout. We took around $300,000 from the insurance payout for the build, sold the block, and then they went and reinvested that into 3 more investment properties in Brisbane, and today they're multimillionaires. So the point is, the tenants burnt the house down and they still didn't give up. I've got a recent example for some clients. So I've got some clients that I've been working with for a couple of years. These guys bought a house in 2020. They bought a house under my guidance, and it was around $450,000. Now, I just did a review with them yesterday. That house today is worth $850,000. So they've made $400,000 in the last 5 years. Now, when we first took on this management, they had found their own tenants. We took on the management. We, looked after those tenants. Let's just say, to keep it quick and polite, those tenants were horrible. All right, we ended up having to boot them out. They stopped paying. There was disputes. There was apparently some kind of abuse within the household. The interest rates have also increased for those clients. So interest rates went from, again, in 2020 to 2% up to 7%. They had issues with some of the bills that they received. So there was some other costs that they had to go and do to fix because of those tenants that wasn't covered by their insurer. They had some issues when it came to trying to get those tenants out of the house, right? And it kind of cascaded from there. But the point is, all the problems that they had, they've made $400,000 in 5 years. So the fact of the matter is, and this is the question that I posed to them, all the stuff that you went through over the last 5 years with the highs and lows of owning this property, is it worth $400,000 to you today, 5 years later? The answer I got was absolutely. It was absolutely worth it. In fact, if we had our time again, I could almost bet you if the clients could, they would have bought 10 of those houses and done it 10 times over if they could have, right? I mean, I've had properties myself personally. Bought the house pre-COVID when the home builder grants came out. Bought the house. It took 3.5 years for them to build the house. I bought the house for $379,000. That's almost a $700,000 house today. I've almost doubled my money. Yes, it was painful, the fact that it took 3 years to build. It was painful. If I had my time again and had a time machine, I would have bought 5 of them if I could have. I would do that shit over and over and over. It's like no consideration. It is an absolute no-brainer that I would do that again and again and again. The point is, guys, property investment is a hurdle race. You got to jump the hurdles, right? They are going to be hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. You have to jump them and keep running. The point is to never give up, right? See, the fact of the matter is with this, property is obviously a slow moving asset, right? So generally speaking, we're not going to get those same returns year on year forever, right? It comes with highs and lows. But if you're consistently managing risk and holding for the long term, you almost can't go wrong. It's going to be like something has to drastically go wrong over and over for you to not win at the end of the day. But the point is, so many times I've had conversations with people, particularly of late, one little hurdle comes up and they want to quit and run away. Now, there is an expression, and I am stealing this expression, right? This is from a movie called Madagascar. I hope everyone here has seen that. Yes, it is a kid's movie. Yes, it's animated. There is a very funny quote that I use all the time with my team when something goes wrong. For those who know the movie Madagascar, you'll remember those 3 little penguins, right? Smile and wave. Something goes wrong, just smile and wave. Accept it, move forward, keep moving, and don't stop moving, and do it again, and do it again, and again, and do not ever quit. See, the point is, guys, if you quit, everyone else wins. You know, when you buy a property, there was a client many years ago who had an investment property and sold it because it was vacant for 3 months. She couldn't find tenants and thought, nah, property investment doesn't work. I'm going to go and sell it. Now, just consider this. When she bought the house, that real estate agent would have made probably $15,000 to $20,000. In stamp duty, the government would have made $15,000 to $20,000. In the mortgage repayment she would have had over those years, right? The tenant's obviously paying and then the bank is making interest. The bank would have made $20,000 to $30,000 worth of interest every year of her owning that property. When she sold, sure, she may have sold at a small profit, but after she pays her taxes, 10, 15 grand worth of taxes on that, then she had to pay agent's fees. So the point is, if you just throw your hands and give up and just quit halfway through your strategy or after buying one property, not only has everyone else around you won because the real estate agent's making his money, the government's making their money, the bank's making their money, you're making and giving them tens of thousands of dollars a year for what? For you to not win? See, this is the problem when you want to quit. One thing I want to really get across here, property investment is not easy. It's simple. It is not easy. Investing in general is not easy. Mitigating risk over time consistently, managing your emotions, making sure that you're not reacting to the market or getting FOMO and reacting out of FOMO. Like that shit is really freaking hard. It's simple, but it's very difficult to do. The point is, if you give up, everyone else wins. Everyone else wins, but you don't. The banks win. The real estate agents win. At the end of the day, I set this company up for my clients to win. Where I think, and look, this doesn't just sit with property investment investing, right? This goes to anything that you're doing in life. And it doesn't matter what career you're in, doesn't matter where you work, doesn't matter what you do with your time. If you experience a hurdle and your option is to quit, just understand everyone else wins and you don't get to win. The only time you truly lose is when you choose to give up. Now, my only encouragement that I have with clients like this, and I have had this conversation a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, hence why I'm having this conversation today on this show and really what I'm trying to speak to. It doesn't matter what you do, and it doesn't matter how you win, doesn't matter how you lose, it doesn't matter what happens. Never quit. If you get low valuations on a property, keep moving forward. Jump the hurdle, keep moving forward. If we go through a downturn, jump the hurdles and keep moving forward. If interest rates increase again, jump the hurdles and keep moving forward. Make it work. If you can do that, and if you can show that kind of grit long term, I can almost guarantee you will win no matter what. All right? So like I said, guys, that's pretty much the main message of today. I really do hope this has landed for some people out there. I'll admit that I've been guilty myself of wanting to quit in the past. In fact, the amount of times that I've wanted to quit this business, it's probably happened weekly since I started 5 years ago. This is extraordinarily difficult, but I still keep coming back to the exact same point. If I quit, everyone else wins and I don't. If I quit, my team doesn't win. Our clients don't win. The banks win. The government wins. Everyone else is trying to get money from us wins, but we don't. So guess what? Never going to quit. And I hope you guys don't either. That's pretty much it for this week, guys. Hope you enjoy.